Hello and welcome. I'm Jono Hayes and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. More than 100 aid groups say mass starvation is spreading in Gaza, accusing Israel of blocking access to critical food and supplies. Russia and Ukraine head to Istanbul for their first peace talks in weeks. And Obama calls Trump's treason claims a weak attempt at distraction from the Epstein files backlash. More than 100 aid agencies are warning that mass starvation is spreading across Gaza and accusing Israel of blocking access to food and to essential supplies. The United Nations says its workers are being shot at when trying to distribute aid. That's despite Israeli claims that hundreds of trucks are waiting to be picked up. Gaza's health ministry says dozens have died of malnutrition in just 48 hours as humanitarian groups demand a ceasefire and full access to trapped supplies. Earlier, I spoke to Amjad Shawah, the director of the Palestinian National Non-Governmental Organization Network, who told me what day-to-day life looks like currently in Gaza.
Babies, about 55,000 infants in risk of death if there will be no immediate entry of aid to Gaza. And the same time that we have pregnant women, we have elders, we have people with disability, we have also the youth. Today, there is tens of youth who are just fall down because that they didn't eat for days, and the only food that they received, it's salt with water. This is the things that we are eating. It's 160 days of tight blockade on Gaza, no entry of the basic food items, while Israel continue its killing by the airstrikes to different areas and suffocating the Palestinians by the forcible displacement.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined in the studio by Michel Jabri-Pickett, the Managing Director of This Is Dubai, and by Tala Michel Issa, the Chief Reporter at Arabian Business. Thank you both for joining us this evening. Michel, first we'll turn to you on this. The international community needs to respond at this stage because aid workers say they are being starved. They are the ones who are lining up to try and get this aid, and they're being targeted when they're trying to simply distribute humanitarian relief. It's a sorry state of affairs that we're watching.
It really is, and the international community, as we've talked about many times, 100% has to do something. The fear, of course, the fear is that they won't. And they will say that they want to do something. They'll sign documents saying that they agree that this is horrendous. They'll say that the situation has to end. They'll implore the Israelis to stop doing what they're doing. But the bottom line is that they need to stop speaking and start doing.
I mean, the concern here is that the United Nations is involved, but what are they actually doing? Tala, the responsibility on them, on the UN, during a crisis like this, is it truly preventing them from functioning, or is there maybe some structural failures that are at play here as well?
Look, it's a bit of both, I think. Of course, their ability to actually do anything is obstructed. On a more technical level, obviously, Israel is refusing to renew visas for a lot of aid workers and key staff from UNRWA, OCHA, OHCHR, and then hundreds of emergency teams as well, and aid workers are being denied entry and clearance in general. So, of course, that's disrupting the whole supply chain. Israel has obviously denied that it's done that. But anyway, to answer your question, it's a bit of both. So, of course, the UN's job, the UN agencies that are available there are not able to fulfill their jobs right now, but that's not the full story. So, this is a structural collapse in general. I mean, if you look at the crops, livestock, the markets, the infrastructure, everything's been destroyed in Gaza. And I think the FAO said that around 95% of croplands have been destroyed, and animals as well are gone. So, and then also the IPC famine review said that the area is now facing famine-like circumstances, which obviously is extremely worrying now, especially the point that it's reached now. But when you look at the UN as an institution, this was created for a post-World War II world to deal with conflict where, okay, it's never equal, but this is asymmetric warfare. One side is extremely powerful and the other side obviously doesn't even have food to eat and can't defend itself right now. So obviously, like Michael said earlier, condemnation is easy. And of course, it's very easy for the UN and all these foreign ministers and all these people to come out and say, we strongly condemn, but unfortunately, their hands are tied and they can't really do anything. I don't know if they don't want to upset certain allies. Obviously, the US's position in the Security Council to have the veto power as well plays a role in this, in the way that it continues to protect Israel. But I don't know, let's see. I just think as an institution, it's more than flawed. I think it's failed completely.
But the PNOG and the companies who are in there giving the humanitarian aid, Michael, and when we spoke about this earlier on, they now need the aid themselves. They're in the queues, they're in the lines, getting aid for themselves, but also for their families as well. We've mentioned before, but I don't think we realise how close we are to a complete breakdown, a humanitarian crisis on the likes of which we've never seen in human history.
So I would actually call that human history comment to account, because I would say 10 days ago was the 40th anniversary of Live Aid. And that was at a time when musicians came together to feed Ethiopians who were experiencing what we thought was one of the world's worst famines. Mm-hmm. I would say that what is going on in Gaza is even worse, because not only is the famine happening, but we can all see it every day on our phones, constantly through social media. There's absolutely no excuse for the genocide that is happening to continue. And yet, the international community, as Tala said, will come together and speak about how bad it is, but they won't act.
And that's a concern, is the lack of action as well. And Tala, we're seeing not enough pressure, I think, applied on an international level. Who do you think needs to apply the pressure right now? Because Israel simply, from what we're hearing from 100 plus aid agencies who say this needs to stop, is that it's not getting through. And it's Israel that are blocking it getting through. Who do you think the pressure needs to come from?
Honestly, the one person that can actually put pressure on Netanyahu to do anything is Trump. He has the military and financial muscle to pull that off. Honestly, I don't really see any other way.
I don't, Michael, again, the words have been there, the sanctions have been threatened, the sanctions have been put in place on certain things. A lot of talk, not a lot of action. But from the EU, likewise as well. The UK yesterday, and David Lammy saying that the situation there is grotesque. And that word hits quite strong. But again, it's words, not actions.
And I think if the international community really wanted to send a message, they could, in a very peaceful and effective way, start to introduce real sanctions against the Israelis. So student visas for Israelis, stopped. Israeli travelers, no countries will accept them. Airlines flying out of Israel, no countries will not allow that. Stop trade. And to do it not, as Donald Trump has done with Vladimir Putin, 50 days ahead, but you've got 48 hours. It stops. There's a really interesting couple of statistics that you can look at. The Israeli government says that on average, 146 trucks have gone into Gaza every day. The US, however, says that to feed everybody there, you need 600 a day. Now, that's a massive difference. And that is just one small example of how the international community is watching it, as we all are, and failing consistently to do anything.
Before we move on, I want to get an opinion from both of you on this. A lack of independent journalists in Gaza is definitely something that we're seeing. We don't understand really what's happening, because we're getting pictures which Israel will say are from Hamas, Hamas will say are is a true representation. Do we need journalists on the ground quicker and now?
Yeah, well, that's exactly the problem, like you said. I mean, journalists, our job is to verify information, to find out what's happening, to report the news to people in the most impartial way, facts. And unfortunately, there's such a lack of information. There's a massive blind spot in Gaza right now.
And I think if you've nothing to hide, Michael, allow them in.
Exactly.
And as Tala said, I agree with everything. The one I would add is to hold authority to account. Absolutely. And that is what journalists would do on the ground. But, you know, the Community to Protect Journalists has said that since the war began, 178 journalists have been killed. Now, those are mostly Palestinians who are in Gaza, who are doing a lot of the grunt work so that organizations around the world can find out what's going on. But if you are a foreign journalist from the States and you want to go in, you have to go in with the IDF. And right away, that compromises you. And they will also, the IDF will also make sure that they vet that material. So you have to submit to that. It's one thing for somebody to give their content, a reporter to give their content to an editor. That's how we make sure that we're doing the process properly. But to give it to an entity that is the aggressor in a war, nobody's agreeing to that, and that's why there are no journalists there.
That's exactly the definition of the chickens are running KFC. When you're getting that level of editorial control, it's a concern.
Reinforcing
Thank you both so
propaganda.
much for your thoughts on that. Tala and Michael, stay right there. We'll move on to our next story. Russia and Ukraine are set to resume their direct peace talks in Istanbul. That's for the first time in over 7 weeks. But hopes are low. The Kremlin is warning that negotiations will be difficult. Meanwhile, protests have erupted across Ukraine after President Zelensky signed a controversial law weakening anti-corruption bodies, which has raised alarm bells among Western allies. Earlier, I spoke to Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko, who wasn't feeling too optimistic about the latest round of talks. Have a listen.
Putin wants to continue the war, and for the moment he doesn't want to stop. And the only way how he can be made to stop is if he will be punched hard, first of all, by United States. We heard President Trump recently who said that he gave Russia 50 days. And I hope that he will continue this line of really strong and harsh tone with Russia that can really help. But again, I don't believe something will happen now. Probably we need to wait these 50 days, and then United States will need to put a really serious sanctions, including secondary sanctions against countries buying Russian oil. And only after this, I think we can have a real possibility to have Russia at the negotiation table.
Tala, first we'll turn to you on this one. What would success even look like at these peace talks at this stage? Do either side actually even want peace to go to the table and have a chat?
Mm-hmm. I'll answer the first part of your question. I think in a near perfect world, probably an immediate ceasefire just to end the fighting. We've seen that before, and obviously it didn't hold up. But then when we actually go back to the last 2 rounds of talks, they ended up with, a prisoner exchange, the return of the dead bodies of some soldiers. Yes. So hopefully we might see another prisoner exchange. That would be successful. And then maybe the agreement to continue having conversations to end the war. But both sides, I think, are stalling. They're trying to buy more time. Ukraine is trying to strengthen its defenses. Russia is trying to consolidate gains. So yeah, let's see. I mean, Putin seems unmoved by sanctions in general, and historically we've seen that sanctions, at least in my opinion, they actually end up, for an economy like Russia, ends up becoming more self-sufficient, and then it just pushes it towards China, and I mean, Putin ended up like building up his relationships with different trade partners that only deepened. So I don't know, let's see.
And I do think it's a case that Russia can control the narrative on those sanctions, because I don't know if Putin necessarily cares about sanctions being put in place. Michael, would that be a fair comment?
I think it is fair. I definitely think that, as Tala said, that Russians became very creative during this period. And I think that that's because in a non-flippant sort of way, it's kind of in their DNA to try and figure out how to make the best of what could be an uncomfortable situation. Mm-hmm. Of course, there are lots of Russians who had the money and the wherewithal. They were able to travel and leave. But the ones who stayed, they've been able to deal with it. And there has been minimal dissent publicly. And this is one of the areas in which Putin is able to strengthen his point of view all the time, because he can make sure that if anybody is not towing the company line, they will suffer the consequences. And people recognize that. So you have the masses who are not going to speak out. All you have to do is figure out a way to make sure that you control the narrative, and you also give the people at least a little bit of what they want, just to keep them happy, so that things will stay in check.
Now let's turn to Ukraine. Tala, there's been President Zelensky's signing of this order, which will weaken the anti-corruption policy that's in place there. That also may weaken his future positions with the EU, which we'll get to in a second. But surely doing something like this, which even his strongest supporters say is likely to weaken the support at a grassroots level for Zelensky, is not the best thing to do right now.
Look, I mean, we can't deny that it's really bad timing, obviously, for him to make this decision now. And there's definitely a risk. But I don't think it's as big as a lot of experts are making it out to be. So obviously, we can't discount the fact that this is the first major unrest, I guess the largest protest since before the war started. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, let's see how this plays out. Obviously, the EU is not happy, and this could eventually affect Ukraine joining
because
the
that
EU.
still is on the table. Ukraine still, when this is
exactly.
over and this has been put to bed, Ukraine will still want to join hands with the EU and make that deal official. And something like this, and losing Western allies at such a pivotal time, may not be the best move from Zelensky currently.
Yeah, but I think that the anti-corruption protests, I think that that's a conversation for another day. I really think that Zelensky and the Ukrainians and the EU, for that matter, are prepared to table that so that they can focus on ending the war, and they can come back around to the anti-corruption concerns.
Something they can table because it's now and it's relevant, the Mirage jet, the French Mirage jet that Ukraine has lost. We heard from Oleski a while ago when we spoke to him, who is a Ukrainian MP, that is not a big deal, but it's difficult to see it as anything but a big deal. And more than anything else, very symbolic is what it would seem, Michael, that we're hearing about this Mirage jet being taken out of the equation.
I think it is symbolic, and I don't think that in a more traditional, evenly fought war, you would be talking about one fighter jet.
No, it's one, but I think it's the symbolism of it more than anything else.
And that's exactly my point, is that we are talking about one, and it is because it is part of a shrinking set of resources that the Ukrainians have. And so when one goes down, that starts to make you think, remember, you have to understand that the weapons that the Ukrainians have are mostly defensive weapons, and they're not in the position where they're fighting fire with fire. You know, the Russians are the aggressors. They have all the military. The Ukrainians are trying to do the best that they can and stop the Russians from advancing. So when one fighter jet goes down, that normally wouldn't be a big deal. But because it does represent a symbol of what is happening to the Ukrainians, I think it takes on greater significance.
Now, we don't know what's in their arsenal currently, because we know that conversation has gone on where there has been an arms agreement between the US and Ukraine as well. And even when we spoke to Vladimir Zelensky's senior advisor and right-hand man, effectively, he said that even if they did obtain long-range offensive missiles, that nobody would know about it. So it will be kept on the QT. So it's interesting to know that they are selling this as the Mirage jet is not a big deal on loss. Before we wrap this up, Tala, how much trust really is there between Russia and Ukraine at this point when so much water has gone under the bridge?
Well, non-existent, and the talks so far have been largely symbolic in May and June. So Russia insists on territorial concessions. Ukraine has repeatedly rejected those. It's diplomatic theater at this point, so
yeah,
let's see.
That's one of the best ways it's been described in recent days is diplomatic theater is what we're seeing playing out.
What I would say, though, is if the international community or Donald Trump wanted to exact a real toll on the Russians, is not give them 50 days, or at the very end of the 50-day period, come back and say, okay, you've got there's $300 billion in Russian frozen assets in G7 countries. We're going to take that and we're going to give that to the Ukrainians, or we're going to give it to the EU. Again, stop Russian airlines from landing in certain countries, making sure that Russians can't travel. There are so many options on the table that could be looked at other than escalating the fighting.
We are just over 6 weeks away from that September 2nd 50-day deadline as well. So this story will continue to play out. Thank you both, Michael and Tala, for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to our next story. Former President Barack Obama has hit back at President Trump's claims of treason and rigging in the 2016 and the 2020 elections. Trump has accused Obama of criminal behaviour by stealing and trying to throw the election. Obama's spokesperson responded to the allegations, calling them outrageous, ridiculous, and a weak attempt at distraction. Here's a reminder of what President Trump had to say.
But you know what? If you look at those papers, they have them stone cold, and it was President Obama. It wasn't lots of people all over the place. It was them too. But the leader of the gang was President Obama, Barack Hussein Obama. Have you heard of him? And except for the fact that he gets shielded by the press for his entire life, that's the one they... Look, he's guilty. It's not a question, you know, I like to say, let's give it time. It's there. He's guilty. This was treason. This was every word you can think of. They tried to steal the election. They tried to obfuscate the election. They did things that nobody's ever even imagined, even in other countries. President Obama, it was his concept, his idea, but he also got it from crooked Hillary Clinton. Crooked is a $3 bill.
Hillary Clinton's back in the good books, is what President Trump has said. But unfortunately for Barack Obama, he's now on the receiving end. I guess Joe Biden is off the table in terms of having a go at him. But treason is a strong word to use, a very strong word to use. Michael, if there is truth to these claims, is Obama correct in thinking that this is a distraction technique if there's not truth? But what if there is truth?
So the key word is treason. And I think that that is one of Donald Trump's verbal tells. Not fewer than 12 people has he accused over the years of treason. When he wants to deflect and he wants to go on the attack and he wants to control the narrative, it's one of the words that comes up quite often with him, where he will make sure that people recognize, because treason is a capital offense in the States, people can be put to death. And so when a sitting president uses that against a former president, that is going to 100% take over the news cycle for at least a day or two. The issue that he faces are the Epstein files, and while there is going to be a summer recess now, he's going to have to keep people distracted for 6 weeks so that by the time politicians in the States come back into session, they will hopefully, in Donald Trump's opinion, no longer be focused on the Epstein files.
There's only so many stories that you can put out into the news sphere and hope that something sticks. And that seems to be very much what has happened here. But let's keep in mind, Obama and Trump saw sitting together at Jimmy Carter's funeral, Tala, indicating that there was some polite chit-chat between the two. Behind the scenes, it seems that the situation may be a little bit frostier than what we saw at Jimmy Carter's funeral.
Definitely frostier, but also we need to take into account, like, politicians in public, ceremonies like that, they're not going to show their true feelings towards each other. But this latest clash, I think, shows there might be some personal animosity, because Obama would, I mean, if you go back to maybe 3-4 years ago, he would never respond to a comment like that, I think.
I don't think he would have publicly responded, and I don't know how wise of a decision that was on the part of Obama's spokesman to say anything. But you would question, well, why say anything at all? Because you're now creating more of a drama about it. And neither of you kind of touched on this, but what if there's truth behind this? What if Trump is telling the truth here and there is documentation that proves that Obama had approached the Russians to throw the election?
So there isn't. The report that Tulsi Gabbard is citing is the same, came to the same conclusions as the committee to investigate that was chaired by Marco Rubio, which was that there was no concrete evidence that Russia actually was able to sway any votes, no rigging of any machines. But what Russia wanted to do and what they were successful at doing was influencing people through social media posts. They wanted to gain access to Hillary Clinton's emails and dump them, which is what they did. They believed, the Russians believed, that Donald Trump would be a more favorable president. So they wanted to make Hillary Clinton look not so good. That's what they wanted to achieve. And some of that was achieved. But as far as the rigging of elections, that didn't happen. So what Tulsi Gabbard cited and what the president also mentioned is the findings were the same as the findings years ago. So there was no change. But again, this is Donald Trump's strength, which is when he's in a corner, goes on the offensive, attacks, creates chaos, lashes out at people, uses the word treason, and this is, well, we're talking about it, and so many other news organizations are talking about it, and that means that there's less oxygen to be used for a discussion about the Epstein files.
It's still not going away, though. We're not going to get to it tonight, but it's still in the news sphere. We also saw as well the MLK, the Martin Luther King files, against his family wishes, might I add, have been released, Tala. So that's, some are saying, another distraction technique by the administration.
Definitely. I mean, it's typical Trump, like Michael said. He wants to deflect. He's, at least for the Epstein files, he was directly asked that question out of context by some reporters, and he just decided, okay, I'm going to say something outrageous. It's going to become a headline. People might forget about it, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on under the surface that are probably against Trump's wishes, that might surface eventually. And he might just give us another crazy headline. Who knows?
Well, it is daily, but these kind of wild claims, and there is a lot of them, as you say, substantiated, Michael, as well. Are they standing well with the voters and Trump's MAGA supporters? How is it going down with them, do you think?
So the MAGA base is what is crucial for Donald Trump's success, and if he is going to believe that he's controlling the narrative. If he can get certain right-wing podcasters and media personalities off the Epstein Files conversation, he will have achieved some success. But there are enough fringe guys who are still going to be hammering away. And now it's become a political issue. Before it was a conspiracy issue. Now it's a political issue, which means that the Democrats have it in their teeth and they're not going to let it go. Now, they don't have control of the House, so what they can do is very limited. But they are starting to smell a little bit of weakness on Donald Trump's part. And if they can then create tension and excitement within the MAGA base, then maybe that will mean that they'll continue to talk, and that will mean that Donald Trump might start to feel the pressure.
I mean, it's a delay tactic more than anything else, more than deflection. Yes, we're deflecting for right now, but I guess if we have a cavity in our tooth, Tala, it's eventually going to have to come out. You can do whatever you want to patch it over, but that's a temporary fix.
Exactly.
Eventually, we're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off here, and Trump surely knows that. Sometime, we're going to have to face up to the Epstein files.
He does. But then again, at the same time, Trump always needed a villain in his story. That's his political identity kind of hinges on this, the binary, like, this is bad, this is good, you know, this person's bad, this person's good. Or he needs an enemy constantly, and he thrives on chaos and conflict, I think. And, you know, the villain used to be Joe Biden. Then it was Hillary Clinton. Then it was the Department of Justice. And now it's Obama again. So let's see where his criticism is going to go next. It also reframes his whole deep state plot against him kind of narrative, I think.
I think every superhero needs a supervillain, otherwise they wouldn't be a superhero.
Exactly.
He is Lex Luthor to Superman, effectively, is what's happening. Let's move on to our next story. Children in the United Kingdom could soon be given very strict social media restrictions, according to the country's technology secretary. Peter Kyle told reporters he was concerned about the amount of time that kids are spending on apps and the content that they view on those apps. A 2-hour cap has been considered after consultation with numerous tech companies. Michael, the government getting involved in something like this is limiting down kids' screen time. Is that a good idea? Are they spending too much time on phones and on social media?
So there's a yes and a no. So it's, yes, I agree. Kids are 100% spending too much time on social media. I know I am. But I would say, no, it's not the government's responsibility. It might be the government's responsibility to have conversations in public, to have interviews with the media. But I think it's the responsibility of the parents, first and foremost. Then I think it would be the responsibility of perhaps schools to make sure they introduce policies. But I think if you start, it's a slippery slope. If you start to legislate these things, first of all, where does it stop? But also the logistics of how you actually make it work, how you impose a ban, and then what would be the penalties. I mean, it creates a great conversation starter, but I think the government needs to allow this to rest with parents and individuals so that they can police it themselves.
Tala, we've seen something similar in Australia, a tightening of restrictions in terms of screen time. What's happening there and how is that done?
I mean, I don't know the full details, but I know that they're trying to enforce or have enforced a full ban on under 16s in Australia. But I think a tool like that is too blunt to enforce. And in my opinion, I think a 2-hour cap on social media might be too low for kids these days. And I think that's only going to have the opposite effect. I think they're just going to sneak around and be tech savvy and find another way to get access to the internet.
Look, I'm 100% sure there's every under the age of 16-year-old kid out there could run circles around us technology-wise. I don't doubt that for a second. But they're growing up in an age where AI is effectively out there and it's part of the atmosphere, and it's part of the atmosphere they're going to have to work in the future. Surely putting a device in their hands from a very early age gives them an added advantage as opposed to a disadvantage.
But I think this is where the government comes in, because the biggest failing of society now is the education system is still antiquated. So what should happen, to your point, is that schools then need to make sure that there is so much more education that's geared towards making sure children are AI capable for when they graduate. So that just means that more screen time in schools. I do think that, you know, if everybody under the age of 16 didn't have a phone, couldn't access it, and it was illegal, then I think there would be less pressure to have one. For what reason? All my friends, well, none of them have it. So I think that there is a way forward, but I think it's something that has to be done in conjunction with the parents, the voters, and also I think the education system and the schools themselves need to take this issue and speak to their community and their parents and find out, and the students as well, and find out what is the best way forward.
If these kids are in school, and you're talking about formative years, 12 through to 16, 17 years of age, and they're not connected to a mobile device, in modern terms, I think they'd feel more than just a bit left out. They'd probably feel a bit isolated from not just their peers, but from the world. And I certainly think that being online is an added advantage, surely, Tala, even if there's helicopter parents who also wouldn't like to leave their kids out without a phone.
Well, exactly. I think, I mean, if I had children in school and they didn't have a phone and I didn't know where they were all the time, I would be worried. I think as a parent, you want to be able to get in touch with them whenever. But then this brings another, I guess, subject into question. I think it's the devices that we currently have, the smartphones that are available, are not suitable for children, I think. And if you're going to go ahead and put, enforce a legislation on this entire thing, then there should be devices that are specifically tailored for kids. And until we see something like that, I don't think there is going to be any regulation that is going to stick 100%. And kids are always going to find a way around it. I mean, we're seeing kids being more tech savvy than their parents now.
Yeah,
so.
yeah, oh, for sure, for sure.
I would say that the phone that is, I would even say that well, I do agree with it's a good idea that the tech companies should be creating this. I think what they could do is, when we moved here in 2003, go back to the Samsung flip phone that I had. You can text and you can call. That's all kids need, and I think to your point, that's what really freaks out parents is when they can't get a hold of their children. They don't need a smartphone for that. You can go back to an earlier model and the kids will have everything that they need and parents will have access to them.
How would they share memes is the big question. Do we put the onus on tech companies then, Michael? Do you think we say, right, you're releasing the brand new iPhone 17, we're just over a month away from that being released. Do we have parental controls on that, whereby there's an activated passkey, which is almost impossible because it's so highly encrypted to break down, that must be activated by a parent for the child to be able to fully access the features, and you can switch on and off as required, and put the onus back on tech companies to say, you must do this?
So maybe I'm not in a combative mood right now, but I think that, yes, I think governments should be working with tech companies to find a way forward. I can't imagine that Mark Zuckerberg, who has, I think, at least one child, is not going to be concerned about the amount of screen time that child has. I think that a lot of these tech companies, I mean, behind the tech companies, it's individuals, and in many cases, it's parents. So speak to them and work with them to find a way forward so that, the government isn't getting in the way of them making money, but the government is working with the tech companies to find a way so that the parents are happy and so that the children are happy, because we don't know what the long-term repercussions are of a 6-year-old today. What will they be like when they're 26?
Of course.
And I think it can be a little bit disconcerting when you're walking around a mall and you're seeing children who are incredibly young being so agile on a phone. And I would hazard a guess to say they're also so used to being on the phone, or at least having a screen of some sort in front of them.
It does seem to keep them quiet, though, so there's always that to keep in mind as well, from a parent's point of view, of course. And finally, Michael and Tala have come up with some of the more quirky stories of the day. Michael, we'll turn to you first. Cyber attacks sometimes can be quite tricky to execute, or sometimes can be as simple as picking up the phone, it seems.
I love this story because we can all relate to it. We've all worked at organizations where the IT department has been quite aggressive when they've said you need to have these workshops so that you can identify what phishing emails are and what a cyber attack is. So Clorox, the bleach company in the States, outsourced their IT needs to a provider, a company by the name of Cognizant. According to the Reuters report, there's a suit that's been filed against Cognizant by Clorox because there is a Scattered Spider, which is a hacker organization, infamous, and the belief is that when they wanted to hack Clorox's data, what they did is they called the Cognizant service desk and said that they had been locked out, and they asked for the passwords. And the service department, without verifying who these guys were, gave them all of the information so that they could then log into the system and log out Cognizant so that they couldn't get it, because what Scattered Spider does is they go in, they lock you out, and then they hold you for ransom so that you can get in. So in the lawsuit that, according to Reuters, Clorox says that they lost $380 million because of this attack in August of 2023.
Incredible to think that, unless the password was the oversecure password 1 with a capital P, no real reason for that to happen. And crazy to think that it might be so easy to just pick up the phone, get these details, and lose millions of US dollars. Scary.
It is scary, and it's also, there's a bit of sweet justice in it, because the number of times where I would be so frustrated with my system, and then the IT guy would say, well, did you turn it on and turn it off again? And sure enough, that's exactly what it would be. And they, of course, would walk away from me thinking I was an absolute idiot. And I was. So now here, I'm hoping that IT departments around the world are actually maybe having a more serious conversation about what it is that we do so that we're actually not the one that's putting the company at risk.
Wow, it's an incredible story. Tala, your story. A kebab shop in Istanbul has gone viral, but it's not for the right reasons. What's happened?
Well, I saw this meme on Sunday evening, actually. And the caption, I think, said, Turkey has discovered AI or something. Anyway, a family of tourists, or a tourist, I still don't know the identity of the person who posted the video, but was walking past, it was in Istanbul, walking down the streets, walked past this kebab shop, and then they saw pictures of, I think, a kebab shop endorsed by Snoop Dogg, David Beckham.
Wow.
Who else was it? There was
Rock.
one
The
more.
Rock is there. Mark Zuckerberg's there, yeah.
And later on, when they watched that video after they posted it, they only noticed that it wasn't true because The Rock and Mark Zuckerberg had the same hands.
But otherwise, they were convinced that all of these celebs had gone to eat at this kebab shop.
I mean, look, if I was a tourist and I walked past that place, probably really hungry, I'd have been like, oh, they must have the best kebabs. Maybe their kebabs are good, obviously, but I think it's creative genius.
But with AI, you can make any celebrity do anything these days, which is a concern because now you're going to see celebs endorsing things that they would never normally put their name to.
Or you can see former presidents being arrested by the FBI in the White House.
Yes,
Another great allegedly AI-driven photo. Allegedly AI-driven photo that we saw surface online today as well. But that is a great story. And like you said, I think I would have gone to try the kebab out just on the basis that their marketing team deserves a little hat tip to say, well done, that wasn't a bad effort. Well, I want to thank you both so much for joining us in the studio. Once again to our guest, Michael Jabri-Pickett, the Managing Director for This Is Dubai, and to Tala Michel Issa, the Chief Reporter at Arabian Business. And that gets us to the end of the show for today. Thank you for joining us on W News Extra. Please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. As always, you can follow us on X, and GNT with Michel Prendergast is coming up next. Goodbye.